I kind of want to go through this again. I think it was really interesting. So you started the thread. This is a thread about how journalists decide what is news and what isn't. Anyone shaping the news and anyone consuming the news should understand who decides what counts as news, how they decide it, and what determines what they say about it. Here I ask a few questions. And you started out by pointing out that air pollution kills 10 million people, 10 million each year, and causes untold additional illness and suffering, but it's rarely featured in daily news stories. Why? So I wanted to start there. I think I know the answer, but you posed the question why. Can you kind of elaborate on that particular point about air pollution?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. This is such an important topic. I mean, we are right now careening toward ecological devastation. We are one of the most unequal societies in modern recorded world history. Um, Around the globe, there is absolutely pervasive and overwhelming preventable suffering. We have hundreds of millions of people every single day, living on the verge of starvation. We have very basic medicines that aren't being made available. In this country, just if you look at this country, just taking a step back and just thinking domestically for a second, we are the greatest human caging force in modern recorded world history. We're caging Black people at a rate 6 times that of South Africa at the height of apartheid. We have huge rates of preventable illness, lack of access to healthcare, all of the things that you and I, work on. Whether it's the $50 billion corporate wage theft epidemic, or the lack of access to basic care and treatment, or children living next to toxic waste sites all over this country. These are the things that actually threaten people's health and safety. When you look at the kinds of things that cause death and suffering, the murder rate and crime that are sort of capturing the imaginations of journalists and corporate media all over the country are a minuscule percentage of the overall threats that we face every single day. So I think it's worth exploring. How do we get to a point where the really existential threats that we face every single day and the threats to people's health, safety, and well-being, particularly poorer people in our society, are just not covered in an urgent way by the media at all? If you look across the country, there's almost no stories about wage theft. Even though wage theft costs low-wage workers about $50 billion a year by conservative estimates, that's about 5 times the amount of all burglary, larceny, theft, robbery, all property crimes, so-called, combined. And yet police don't investigate it. Police don't issue press releases. The most mainstream media outlets don't cover wage theft. And yet, what we know from the scientific literature on this is if you take money away from very low-income people, which is what most wage theft is doing, you actually make it more likely for them to get sick, to contract diseases, to be evicted from their homes. And all of those things are actually linked with death. So in any kind of empirical, objective, scientific way, the media is covering things breathlessly, right? There's 24-hour news cable shows about a supposed surge in crime. I've also written threads about how that's actually not real because, police control and manipulate crime data. But even if we want to be sober about, the horrible problems of violent crime and the level of urgent coverage the media is giving to that, and I have a few theories about why that we can get into, is totally disproportionate to the amount of harm that actually threatens.
Right. And just so the audience understands, when you're talking about wage theft, you're basically talking about capitalism. I mean, massive corporate Goliaths stealing from their employees that are producing the record profits. Do I have it right?
Yeah, so I mean, wage theft can refer to a number of corporate practices, but essentially what it does, it's not even, this is theft that even sort of the capitalist bosses and even the elites who wrote these laws that are stacked against the working class, this is theft that even those laws recognize as theft. So what we're talking about are extra wealth extraction beyond the sort of capital wage relationship, like, so beyond the sort of exploitation and extraction that is inherent in that relationship between capital and labor. We're actually just talking about like additional theft on top of all of that violates existing laws in every city and state in this country.
And your thread also pointed out that instead of focusing on these stories, they focus on other types of crime. Uh, their kind of crime publicized by police press releases, usually involving poor people. So they're focused on, there's a big thing right now about robberies are up and theft from, stores are up. So they focus on specific type of crimes that are really focused on working people, poor people. But these kind of crimes that actually benefit corporate America, they don't focus on.
Let me give you an example. So, if within the last few months, there was a series of viral news stories about supposed shoplifting problems at Walgreens, the massive pharmaceutical pharmacy chain, right? And one particular video that a group of right-wing people in San Francisco conspired to sort of like push out into the social media world, it went viral. And it was someone like on a bicycle stealing stuff from Walgreens and then just running out. That video and sort of the related media manipulation around it led to like 400 articles in major publications across the country about the supposed urgent problem of shoplifting from major corporate pharmacies. Okay. Walgreens, it turns out, played a huge role in that, because what they were actually doing was they were closing a bunch of their stores for various reasons related to private equity investment and profits and like changes in the marketplace in terms of like where people get their drugs. Do they go in person? Do they order them online? Walgreens had actually announced quietly in the corporate world they were going to be making a bunch of changes to their business model. They were closing stores anyway, but Walgreens hit on this and seized on this, and they blamed shoplifting by very poor people for their closure of stores. And some of the media just ran with that. And this is so funny because it's also a company that has recently settled wage theft claims for millions of dollars, way more money than involved any of these shoplifting instances in San Francisco. That received almost no coverage in the media. And so, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks with this barrage of stories in outlets and local news stations all over the country about the supposed scourge of like retail theft mobs and things like that, we have to understand that is actually all being planted by corporate marketing departments, by these multi-billion-dollar retail stores and local police, because local police only focus on the crimes committed by poor people, and they depend on this sort of cycle of public outrage over the crimes of the poor in order to keep up their symbiotic relationship with corporate America. And so what we're seeing all over the place, both in the media and in police departments and in prosecutors' offices all over the country, is almost completely ignoring the criminal wage theft laws and highlighting in story after story, press release after press release, day after day, hour after hour, urgently with these breathless headlines that we should all be very afraid, highlighting relatively small amount of low-level theft by people from major corporate retail stores.
And it also has an effect because this barrage of media stories on shoplifting led California Governor Gavin Newsom to increase police funding, like we need more money for the police to address the shoplifting wave, as opposed to these other crimes you're talking about that pose an actual threat.
It has worked time and time again. That is why every year for the last 50 years, we have increased the amount of public investment in the carceral bureaucracies of pain and punishment. Police, handcuffs, tasers, guns, probation officers, parole officers, prison guards, jail guards, prosecutors. There's a series of multi-billion-dollar companies that profit off of every single stage of this process, from the cash bail industry, which only exists for profit in the United States and the Philippines, right? All the way through to the prison telecom industries, which work with jails all across the country to eliminate parents from being able to hug their children on the theory that they'd spend more money on phone and video calls if they were barred from contact with their families. That's what all this is designed to support. And that's why all of these people understand very well that if the public is focused on the crimes of the rich, like I mentioned wage theft, which is about $50 billion a year, but tax evasion by the rich is $1 trillion a year. It's 20 times the problem of wage theft. And yet it's just hardly investigated at all. And the elite bureaucrats who run our law enforcement system, and I use that term in quotes because these people only enforce some laws against some people some of the time, right? They want you to think with the term law enforcement, if a law is broken, it's going to be enforced. Well, that's not true. The tax evasion laws are not enforced. The wage theft laws are not enforced. What is enforced is if a very poor, hungry person in San Francisco goes into a Walgreens and takes a candy bar. right? That is the law that's being enforced, and it's being enforced brutally with
Right.
handcuffs, tasers, and guns.